The 1960s brought about the development of a new breed of car designs known as muscle cars. These models were unlike the ones before them, as they were specifically built to be mid-sized, powerful, and fast. And while there were many muscle cars that lived up to the hype, there were those who fell short of expectations. That being said, these are the 10 worst muscle cars of the 60s for me. But before that, subscribe for more uploads like this. 10. 1965 Chevrolet Impala SS Hardtop Coupe. The 1965 Chevrolet Impala SS Hardtop Coupe had the market in a frenzy when it first came out. I mean, it's a Chevy, so of course the allure was always going to be over the roof. However, all the buzz surrounding its manufacture and release couldn't hide its flaws. Not that it was a complete failure, but it had its fair share of cons. One of the model's most common flaws was its poor handling and inadequate suspension system. For real though, what's a muscle car without proper handling? That alone defeats the entire purpose for which muscle cars are built. Believe me when I say that these shortcomings greatly undermine the performance potential of the car. And this was very disappointing for hardcore muscle car enthusiasts. Simply put, the Impala SS struggled to live up to its expectations on the road. And even though it was a cool model, it just wasn't cool enough to escape this list. But hey, the Chevy SS Hardtop Coupe isn't the worst of them all, because this next 60s muscle car was equally disappointing. 9. 1962 Mercury Meteor. If you look at the 1962 Mercury Meteor, I'm sure you'd be impressed with its beautiful and distinctive design. Not a bad car to be seen cruising around in, but unfortunately, it isn't just looks that make a muscle car great. This model, while having a really great design, falls short in terms of power and performance. But wait a minute, aren't power and performance among the things that define a true muscle car? Yes, they are, which is why the 1962 Mercury Meteor's underwhelming engine comes as a major disappointment. The car's less than impressive engine fails to offer the exhilarating driving experience that should be expected of a muscle car. This alone makes this model easily forgettable, especially since it was released in an era that was defined by other high-powered muscle car models. But the 1962 Mercury Meteor isn't the only muscle car from the 60s that failed to deliver on a powerful engine. This next car is just as guilty. 8. Corvette XP700. I'm talking about none other than the 1960 Corvette XP700. Just like the 1962 Mercury Meteor, the XP700 also had a very good outer design. Everything about the car looked great, from the hood to the trunk. It was definitely a car that had the potential to become one of the best muscle cars from its era. Unfortunately, it too was built with a lackluster engine. I mean, did the manufacturer forget that having a powerful, badass engine is part of the whole idea behind a muscle car? I guess they did. Anyway, the Corvette XP700 did not do enough to match the roar and capabilities of its competitors in the 60s. This left muscle car enthusiasts heartbroken, as this was a model that certainly looked the part, but failed to deliver the ultimate muscle car experience on the open road. This next muscle car didn't have an underwhelming engine, but its flaws were even worse. 7. 1960 Chrysler 300F Convertible. Of course, I'm talking about the 1960 Chrysler 300F Convertible. Just like most convertibles, this particular model was oozing with luxury. It was the kind of car you'd picture yourself cruising alongside a pretty damsel along Miami Beach. And while that was an enjoyable experience for those who owned the car at the time, you can bet your last buck that they didn't enjoy the pace at which the vehicle consumed petrol. Yep, the Chrysler 300F Convertible was a real gas guzzler, and it was sure to take more dollars out of your pocket than other muscle cars would. High gas consumption aside, the 300F was also unnecessarily big and heavy, and that also defeats the purpose of a muscle car, which is supposed to be mid-sized and fast. Of course, the extra weight was always going to hinder its speed. All in all, high gas consumption, the extra size, as well as the extra weight, took a lot out of the 300F's muscle car experience. This reduced the appeal among muscle car lovers who were looking for a combination of practicality and power. Now I have to mention that not all flawed muscle cars from the 60s were criticized for their performance alone. Just like this next car, some were criticized because they were hardly available. 6. COPO Camaro. The 1968 COPO Camaro is the car I'm talking about. Yeah, it was a cool car that every muscle car lover wanted to own, but the problem was, it just wasn't available. A lot of muscle car lovers criticized the manufacturer of the COPO Camaro for its limited availability and exclusivity, which alienated potential buyers. Let's face it, muscle cars are ideally meant to be mass-produced so that those who enjoy the culture can purchase them. They aren't luxury cars on the level of Lamborghinis, Ferraris, or Bugattis, so why limit their production? Yeah, the rarity of the car might have boosted its collector's value, but it also meant that many muscle car lovers never got to experience the thrill of owning this Camaro model. Now let's move back to performance, and this next muscle car was as underwhelming as can be. 5. 1967 AMC Rebel Convertible. Simply put, the 1967 AMC Rebel Convertible is one of the worst muscle cars from the 60s. And trust me, I have a few good reasons for saying this. First of all, its engine performance was totally uninspiring. It failed to live up to the power and speed that is expected of a muscle car, and that diminished its overall driving experience. That aside, its design was also lackluster. For real, it just didn't look nearly as good as the other formidable muscle cars in the market at the time. So what do you get when you mix poor engine performance with uninspiring looks? A terrible, easy-to-forget muscle car, of course. 4. 1969 Chevy Chevelle 427 COPO. Moving on, and we've got the 1969 Chevy Chevelle 427 COPO. Now, if you love a good old powerful muscle car engine, then this would be a great pick. But if it had a great muscle car engine, then why the heck is it on the list of the worst muscle cars from the 60s? Well, it's simple. The engine was just too powerful to be tamed. Yes, the Chevelle 427 COPO was heavily criticized for its unwieldy handling and unrefined driving dynamics. The car was fast, but these shortcomings messed up the overall driving experience. If only the manufacturer gave it better handling, it would have surely been ranked among the best muscle cars of its era. 3. 1968 Dodge Super Bee. Next up is the 1968 Dodge Super Bee. I have to admit, this car had the aggressive looks that you would expect a muscle car to have. But as we already know, looks aren't all that matters. The build quality of this model was too subpar to compete with the best muscle cars in the market. But that's not all, as its reliability was also questionable. I'm sure no one wants a muscle car that breaks down more times than they'd care for. Every muscle car owner wants a combination of performance and dependability, and the Dodge Super Bee just couldn't offer it. 2. 1966 Oldsmobile Toronado. This next muscle car, the 1966 Oldsmobile Toronado, was heavily hammered by critics for its unconventional front-wheel drive layout. This was totally against the traditional rear-wheel drive setup that muscle car lovers were accustomed to. And now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with being innovative, but the shift away from the muscle car norm affected its handling and overall performance. Thanks to this unnecessary innovation, the 1966 Oldsmobile Toronado finds a place on our list as one of the worst muscle cars of the 60s. Speaking of which, the car that takes our number one spot could have easily been one of the best muscle cars in the world if not for some major bloopers. 1. 1966 Ford Shelby Mustang GT 350. I'm talking about the iconic 1966 Ford Shelby Mustang GT 350. Of course, this car is widely celebrated for its association with the legendary Carroll Shelby, but it certainly has its flaws. One of them is the car's overly stiff suspension. This alone is responsible for the uncomfortable riding experience, which makes the car a lot less practical for everyday use. That being said, are there any other flawed muscle cars from the 60s you can think of? Hit the comments below and tell us about them. When you're done, subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you'll know exactly when we upload another interesting video like this. See you next time.